there was a lot of people very upset with the outcome of Mt. Gox, where it looks like Mark Karpales is probably not going to have major long-term problems, despite the fact that $1 billion+ of Bitcoin was lost and a lot of harm was done. We feel like that's an injustice.
BitSwap is the hottest new way to trade tokens. Crawling all the top decentralized exchanges, BitSwap gets you the very best price and value for your trades. BitSwap is changing the game. Try it now at bitswapdex.io. Hey everybody, I am so happy to be joined by Charles Hoskinson. We've talked Cardano a lot on the channel, specifically over the last year. In my opinion, it's got a lot more exciting. Charles, very thankful to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
Well, thank you so much for having me on, BitBoy. It's great to finally actually be on the show. I have seen a few episodes here and there, and I think we've run into each other at a few conferences throughout the world. Yes, we have. We had an interaction one time in real life, which is very rare these days. It's a big deal these days. It is a big deal. I'm sure one day, again, we will be at the same place at the same time. But now, the virtual interview. Here's a question I've been dying to ask you, and I brought this up several times. So the roadmap, it's very slow. It obviously was very slow. And when I first started talking about Cardano, that was something that to me was like a detractor. It was like, okay, well, look, you've got, and don't laugh, okay? You got Tron, you got EOS. They've got such a big first mover advantage because they're like products out before yours is, right? But now that we're down the road and looking at now, like Cardano actually launching and moving forward, the decentralized, Shelley completed the whole thing. Was there any thought to the Bitcoin cycles and bull market cycles when you made this slow roadmap? Well, no, I mean, research takes time. We've written 91 papers. We've written about 1 million lines of code, and there's an enormous amount of scientific and engineering work that had to be done to get us where we needed to go. And while from one perspective, we're slow in time to market, but it was always easy to launch something to market. We could have easily launched something like Tron in 2016 if we wanted to. That's not hard. The hard part is creating novel new protocols, like a scalable proof of stake that's secure and new programming languages and so forth. And if you actually compare us to the people creating new protocols like Algorand and Tezos and Ethereum 2, for example, especially in the case of Ethereum 2, we're actually ahead of them. They're still trying to figure out how to get this proof of stake out there, and we're there. And they've been working on the problem more than a year longer than we have. The other thing is that we asked a very fundamental question. How do we build a foundation to get to 1 billion people? And what does that take? And that's a fundamentally different design requirement than saying, how do we bring something to market? Because, you look at where we're at. We have really expensive systems. We have front running. We have a lot of DeFi failures. We have tons of bad code floating around. These systems really don't scale. There's tons of little issues cropping up. And every one of these guys are like, well, buy first and we'll figure it out later. And if we screw it up, you get the bill, we don't. We felt that was very immoral. We said, so anything we do, we should have rigorous academic foundations upon which we stand to say, okay, what we're doing is reasonable. Furthermore, we needed to broaden the problem, get as many academics as possible involved, some who work for us, some who don't, so that we can get third-party validation that this approach is really legitimate. Remember when we started in 2015, proof of work was king. And all the proof of work people were like, proof of stake doesn't even exist. It's perpetual motion. It's a scam. So it wasn't clear when we started the research agenda if proof of stake was actually possible or not. So it took a real long time to build enough of that scaffolding and validation to get to that point. But now we're in a great place. We have easy way to shard. We have resource determinism with smart contracts. We have the best-in-class network stack. We have a great governance system, which Ethereum has passed on and others have passed on. So we have a huge competitive advantage there. And I think we're very well positioned in 2021 to dominate and in the coming years to actually scale to millions to billions of users. Yeah, well, all that's very exciting. And we're going to actually, this is going to be a two-part interview. We're going to do a second part of this where we're going to talk more about like actually what Cardano consists of and the different developments you guys have had recently. So the thing I want to ask you about is, for now, science. Okay, that's a buzzword that you guys use a lot. Science. And for me, like, I've had a hard time, like, in my opinion, all technology is science, right? And so in some ways, like, what is this distinction that you guys
consider, is it, when you say academics, you just mean someone that has a science degree? Like, what is the science? What is the science?
There's an actual process. This is how you get tenure at a university.
Yeah.
So computer science is a field of study, and cryptography and protocol design is a subfield of that. They've been doing this for 40, 50 years in the academic setting. So you write a paper, you submit the paper double blind, so the authors are stripped and you don't know who the reviewers are, to an actual conference, and the conference is reviewed by your peers. So these are conferences run by Harvard and MIT and CMU. Okay, this is not normal stuff. And then they go through a referee process and they ask questions about the papers, and they either accept or reject them. Most of the tier 1 conferences reject 80 to 90% of the publications submitted to them. They don't survive the peer review process. So when I said we've written a peer-reviewed computer science paper, that means there's an actual process and standard, and it takes months to go through that process and standard. Then after your paper is accepted, it's not over. You have to go and present it. Usually, but pre-COVID days, you actually have to go to the conference, you do a presentation, your colleagues would be right there, they'd ask you questions. And then what happens is your paper becomes part of the scientific literature. So if you Google Ouroboros, for example, you'll see the first result on Google's our paper, and then you'll see citations. If you click that, those are all other papers that have made reference to our work and built on top of our work. I think there's over 900 of them. Yeah. So that's how you get tenure. It's how you become a professor, and it's a whole field of study. And this is what people do all day long. Now, why do we do this? Because it's hard to actually know what's real and know what's not real. You see in this space all the time, zero knowledge this, homomorphic encryption this, multi-party computing, blah, blah, blah. It's noise, word salad. How do you know, if you're not a domain expert who has a PhD in math or computer science or physics, that what you're reading is actually real?
Yeah.
So how about you get a third-party certification from independent people who aren't in the cryptocurrency space, who are actual academic cryptographers who couldn't give a shit about our industry, who care about the science, and they actually read the paper and said, the math is right, the proofs are constructed correctly, the arguments are valid, and so forth. And there are many things you have to do to hit that standard. It's very complex. It's a lot of work. And this is why most people don't do it. Either they don't know how, they can't, or it takes a long time. And it's also frustrating because when you write these papers, you don't just write, hey, here's this one paper, it solves everything. Like Ouroboros, for example, our consensus algorithm. We've written almost 10 papers on it. Yeah. So the first few papers were very foundational. So they were just all about what is a blockchain? How do you write security proofs to prove something is a secure blockchain? Then we had to talk around, like, how do you write a consensus algorithm for a blockchain? These types of things. And each and every one of those were compositional. So they build on top of each other. And in the beginning, it takes years to get momentum. But then once you've done that, you understand the entire design space of what you can and cannot do for your cryptocurrency. So when we ask questions like, if we wanted to simulate this at 1 billion users, how would we write that model? We actually have a very accurate way of thinking about that. Whereas if you follow what Ethereum did with Casper, it's the exact opposite of what we did. It just worked until it didn't, and then it broke, and they say, okay, I guess we need to create another one. We have to create another one. And they spent 3 years in development hell, rewriting Casper over and over again, because the problem is it's too complex. They want to do too many things at once, and it's not clear if by doing A, it breaks B. Whereas we took a very rigorous compositional foundational approach, and we got third-party review. The other advantage of third-party review is that it lets every academic in the world kind of know what the state of the art is, which means every graduate student and postdoc and professor who's interested in this space is willing to have a conversation with us at the very least, in many cases collaborate or do their own work. So it's like I get for free an entire army of people around the world who do research for me, and I don't have to pay them. They're paid by
Has anyone ever told you, Charles, that you're smart?
Well, I mean, but this is a process, right? You know, people ask.
It's a yes or no question, Charles.
Where does medicine come from? Where does physics come from? Where do these things come from? It's like, this is really hard. And Intel does this, Microsoft does this, Google does this, like all the AI stuff that Google does that we're taking advantage of for machine translation and other things. Where did that happen? Some happened in the lab at Google, some happened at Stanford. And so there was university partnerships all around, and they wrote thousands of peer-reviewed papers. That's where Siri came from. It was an academic and DARPA project called
She's a real person, by the way. I don't know if people know that.
Yeah, 2003 to 2008, they worked on it. And Cognitive Assistant learns and organizes. So you have to have a process. And at the end of the day, I have this issue where I talk to journalists, I talk to third parties, and they say, how do we know you solve proof of stake? How do we know you did that? The only tool I have in my toolbox is the academic peer review process, because it's fair, it's balanced, and it's independent of our organization, and people can get some credibility with that. It's kind of like the FDA with drugs. It's like when you take this medicine, how do you know it works? Well, you knew there was some oversight body that tested that. We can criticize the oversight body, and there's certainly problems with the peer review process, but that's not an excuse for the total absence.
Oh my gosh, I have a great analogy. Because honestly, like, I have never really understood this about Cardano. Like, what is the science angle? And now that you're explaining it, I'm actually understanding what you're saying, and I'm on board with it. I think it actually sounds good. This is kind of the analogy, like you just mentioned the FDA. Well, for the FDA with drugs, you know, obviously everything's got to be tested on the front end, like really, really, really tested. By the time something gets released, take, for instance, you know, the vaccines or whatever, like they're, you know, emergency situation, you know, they're needed, and yet it still takes forever to get them because of all the testing. However, when it comes to supplements, it's actually backwards. With supplements, they're able to just put stuff out, and then they only have to be pressed if people die from it. If people die from a supplement, then the FDA is like, well, somebody died. You actually need to look into whether this is effective or not. And this is kind of the difference between what you're saying, the method for what you are doing with Cardano, compared to what just any random Joe Blow project just puts out. Like, they just put it out and say it's going to work, and then they test, and then it turns out to be a scam, or it falls, or it doesn't work. And then they're like, oh, maybe now we need to go back to the drawing board, where you're doing it the opposite way.
It's all about the problem complexity. If your goal is to get like smooth skin, you probably don't need FDA approval, right? There's plenty of things for that. But if your goal is to treat cancer, heart disease, and dementia, these types of things, it's like, that's serious stuff. So you need serious drugs, you need serious medicine. Well, similarly, if your goal is just to build a replicated system, we've had that since Bitcoin. Okay, just copy that template, make some cosmetic change. Like Tron, for example, is a copy of Ethereum with DPoS on it. It's really not that hard to do that. But then the problem is, how do you get to 10 million users? How do you deal with a petabyte scale blockchain? How do you get good quality of service when you have 1 billion users? How do you deal with governance problems of how to upgrade the system without creating a Bitcoin Cash or an Ethereum Classic, or these types of things? Those are super hard problems. Any one of them you could spend years on. With Cardano, we actually tackled like a dozen of them at the same time. And we did it through the peer review method, because it was the only way to organize the research agenda of that scale and make sure all the components were working.
Yeah, we definitely don't want another Ethereum Classic. Whoever's behind that, you got to get rid of those people. Okay, that's what I got to say. Okay, some of you will get that joke. So speaking of Ethereum and the whole thing, we'd like to kind of discuss with you a little bit. I'm going to ask you a personal question first. I'm just going to get this out of the way. It's something I want to ask. Ethereum, I don't know exactly what happened when you left. Do you think you're hard to work with?
Well, no, I think I'm very principled, and so there's a subtle difference there. So, you know, if the goal here is just to make money on the back of retail investors, or it's to do an experiment, and if the experiment fails, you harm other people, but you suffer no consequences and you get all the upside, I don't really have a lot of respect for you. So it just, if you're raising money in certain ways, or you're working in certain ways, I don't have a lot of patience. The other thing is that I realized that you have to take everybody into account. You just can't look at one constituency. So you have to care about your customers and your users. If you build software, you have to build a help desk, this type of a thing. So I get very annoyed when I see those things are missing, or I get very annoyed when I see people win despite the fact that they've caused harm to other people. I mean, like, for example, there was a lot of people very upset with the outcome of Mt. Gox, where it looks like Mark Karpales is probably not going to have major long-term problems, despite the fact that $1 billion+ of Bitcoin was lost and a lot of harm was done. We feel like that's an injustice, right? And we've seen a lot of that in the industry. Like, for example, I have some bad blood with certain exchanges because I directly called out the CEOs for listing BitConnect. Now, normal diplomatic business guy would be like, well, you know, that's not your business. Stay out of it. You need exchanges. There's a reason why we weren't listed on certain exchanges for several years. You know, there was emails back and forth about that. So I kind of have that attitude about it. I certainly have had some issues with certain people, but other people I work very well with. You know, we, for example, have more than a dozen university partnerships. We work with more than 30 academics on a regular basis. I run a company of over 300 people in 40 countries. You know, we have a very low turnover rate. Some of the people in the company have worked here since it was founded. You know, we've worked regularly with more than a dozen plus companies to deliver Cardano, and that's just the Cardano project. Then we consult with Horizon. I consult with
you do? I didn't know that.
Currencies and so forth. And I've worked with
Horizon
for years. So, you know, there's cliques of people I work very well with, but there's legendary fights where I don't work well, like, for example, with Dan Larimer. But there, I mean, it's like I was super critical of EOS. I was super critical of these things. Why? Because they raised $4 billion, and I felt that it was a moral hazard. As for Vitalik, as a person, I have no grievances with him. You know, if we run into each other, I say, hey, he says, hey, it's not a problem. But I do have certain disagreements about how he's historically run Ethereum and things that his ecosystem has done. I felt, for example, that ICO Mania in 2017 was a ticking time bomb. I was on Bloomberg and said stuff about it. And I felt that they benefited tremendously from it and suffered no downside from it, even though the retail investors were hurt. I felt the Ethereum Classic issue was a big bad problem as well, especially some of the behavior of certain people in the Ethereum ecosystem. But, you know,
when it comes to, you were talking about the ICO stuff, just briefly, because I want to move on to another question. And thank you for that answer. I think that was a really good answer. I mean, this is something I've really, you know, I mean, it's kind of almost a joking question, but a serious question too, because I mean, obviously there's been some issues. But when it comes to the ICO craze, you were saying, do you feel the same way about Ethereum and DeFi right now? Do you think that the DeFi craze is similar to the ICO craze?
Again, you say, where do these valuations come from? It's one thing when you have a valuation of X and it's backed by hundreds of thousands of users and lots of innovation and lots of growth, and you know, you're capturing markets that are new and exciting. It's another thing that you just create something over a 6-week period, you launch it, and it's now worth more than a company that's been around for 10 years or something like that. So I think very unrealistic valuations. And what props up those valuations is the greater idiot theory. A lot of people are buying those tokens not to hold them and do stuff with them. They're buying them because they think they can sell them at a higher price point to a new entrant. And of course, that's a Ponzi scheme in that respect. So I think there's a lot of problems with DeFi in its current instantiation. That said, DeFi is going to be the financial stack of the developing world.
Absolutely. Yeah.
About peer-to-peer credit, peer-to-peer insurance. We talk about stable coins. These are nice to have in the United States. These are necessary, absolutely necessary for well-ordered functioning economy in places like Uganda and Rwanda and other places. And so to me, because we do so much business in Africa, I think over the next 10 years, DeFi is going to be one of the fastest growing segments, but the customer base is going to be very different than Silicon Valley or New York and so forth. My problem is none of the incumbent DeFi people really pay much attention to that. Yeah. They're selling this dream that they're entering highly regulated markets and that somehow they're going to take over those highly regulated markets with no domain expertise connection or capacity. I mean, just look at the Ripple lawsuit, for example.
Oh, I know.
I mean, these guys have been around for 8 years. They have over $1 billion in treasury. They have a great board. And even still, there's been a war with the SEC. Yeah. So if you're just an open source developer and you've created a centralized exchange, what chance do you have to stand up against JP Morgan Chase in the United States? The government's not going to let you do it. Yeah. Look what they did to Libra, for example.
I mean, Kick with Ken.
Yeah,
I mean,
and there's no coincidence.
And the harder you fight them, the harder they're going to punish you too.
Exactly. And what's the aftermath of Libra? 48 states are suing Facebook now for antitrust. Yeah, that's probably connected to that. Yeah. So I think you have to be holistic and realistic, you know, when you look at these types of things. The problem is no one wants to hear that. And the other issue is people have incentives to dislike you based on their portfolios. So either you're with me or you're against me. So if you're criticizing the project that I happen to be a member of, you're now attacking my returns, and therefore you're a bad guy. But I've been a very cynical guy throughout a lot of my history in the space because I've seen it all. I was around during the very early days when an altcoin meant a fork of Bitcoin. And then I saw the rise of NXT. I saw Mastercoin and Color Coins. I saw BitConnect and OneCoin. I've seen every scam you can imagine. And I've seen the cycles, and I've seen people come in, lose everything, and then leave very deeply frustrated. So it creates a sense of a standard, which is hard for most people in the space to meet. And also an expectation you have to spend years building things and growing things for it to become real. So I don't like working with people who don't have that mentality, and you know, it's mutual. That's why some people don't work with me. But that's okay. We have great partners like Stephen Wolfram and, you know, Wolfram Alpha. It's a great platform. And he spent 40 years building his platform. We have
a new partnership, right?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Oracles. And then we have Ben Gortzel, for example. He's got his PhD in math at 21, and he's been doing AI work for 30 years. And he created the robot Sophia and these other things. So those are the types of partners we tend to attract. Nation states and very serious people have been around for a long time, and they understand it's perfectly legitimate spending 3 years or 4 years or 5 years building something. look, it's not like this market's all going to go away. Like everybody's going to go to Ethereum or Bitcoin. It's like, oh yeah, okay, we're all in Bitcoin now. We will never move ever again. I mean, look at Microsoft. Everybody was Windows in the late 90s. And now
what happened?
They have zero market share in mobile. Look at Yahoo. They had the dominant search engine. Now they have zero market share, right? So things change so quickly in technology, and it's about foundations and principles, and it's about saying, is it a sustainable model? And is that going to carry you through a decade or 2 decades or 3 decades more? And, you know, we take a very long view in these types of things, and we work with people who have long views.
Yeah, that's good. I like that as well. I mean, and I agree with you. The longer, you know, someone's in the space, the more cynical you can certainly become. I mean, I know, you know, we've seen all kinds of stuff here personally on my channel over the last even few weeks that have made us a lot more cynical on different stuff. But the last question I want to ask you in this segment of this interview is kind of along the same lines of exactly what you were just talking about. You know, Bitcoin, Ethereum, people not staying in those forever. What do you think? Because this is your pitch, you know, and I know you don't have to pitch Cardano. Everybody knows what Cardano is at this point. It's in crypto. But what is your pitch when people say everything's already built on Ethereum almost? The whole decentralized internet of value right now, as they are calling it, but pretty much at this point is built on Ethereum. EOS and Tron, huge failures in my opinion. Neither one of them are ever going to, you know, be anything significant in the long term of crypto, in my opinion. What is Cardano's pitch? Like, how are you positioning yourselves against Ethereum? And as we talked about before, obviously you were part of Ethereum. Even within that, is there like a competitive thing within you that wants to beat them, or is it just strictly
think about Ethereum? Because we do different things. You know, the Ethereum is an experiment, and I usually use the vernacular. It's the pond next to the ocean. So yeah, they're dominant within their pond, and there's lots of cool evolution that's occurred there. But let's be real about the actual use and utility of the system. How many things in your day-to-day do you do that are driven by Ethereum versus a product from Google, Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, or any of the other Fortune 500 companies?
I use a lot of DEXs, but I'm one person.
Yeah, okay. So use a little bit of a DEX here and there. Are you happy with the margins and the trading spreads and these things? Are you happy with the speed and the efficiency? I mean, this is very early days. It's like saying, oh, well, how are we going to beat Netscape? Oh my God, they have such a browser dominance. It's like, this is before you even have Facebook or, you know, Web 3.0 and all this stuff, right? It's like, it's such early days. So I don't worry too much about this. What I worry about are markets that matter. So, you know, for example, we've been in Africa for 3 years, and next year we're going to start announcing deals with millions of users. Now, over the next 5-10 years, we can grow our user base there to tens to hundreds of millions of people. Now, whether Ethereum succeeds or fails, who knows? It's not my prerogative, but just succeeding there, you know, makes us one of the most valuable protocols in the world, because we're enabling a financial operating system for people who don't have one. We've given them economic identity, self-sovereign identity. They have DIDs. We've given them peer-to-peer lending. We've given them peer-to-peer insurance, supply chain systems, voting systems, voter registration systems, property registration systems, payment systems, stable currencies, stock markets, commodity markets, all these types of things. So where's the natural demand and utility for that? They have to live. They have to do business. They have products to trade and serve, and their local governments, they have no preference because they're going from old paper analog systems to new digital systems, and they're kind of leapfrogging. Like when Pakistan skipped copper and they went straight to 4G when they were trying to get phones to everybody. So that's the game we play. We look at that in Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, Africa, Latin America. And you know, if we succeed there, who cares about Bitcoin and Ripple? These other guys, they'll have one customer for every 100 customers I have, and my customers are growing much faster than them. So that's one dimension of it. The other dimension is that many of these products are just experiments, and they're unstable. They exit, they enter very quickly within 12 to 24 months. It's almost like video games. You know, they have this big spike, and then they have this little tail. And then no one plays the game after a few years. Like, when's the last time you played the original Red Dead Redemption? You know,
never, like, literally never.
Yeah, so it's like, you know, maybe you come back to it, but let's be honest here. So a lot of these
that's a great point. I really like that analogy. That's a great point.
Yeah, so a lot of these dApps are you know, just ephemeral, and they come and they go. The other thing is dApps, they're not loyal to infrastructure. Like, how many people who write a website say, I absolutely have to deploy this on Amazon Web Services, and I'm going to go buy Amazon coin, and I'm going to stay in the Amazon ecosystem, even if it's 100 times more expensive? No, it's infrastructure. You look at these things as, a hosting service to hold up your application and give you access to a market. So what's happening is we've noticed that DeFi is moving from mono-chain to polychain. They're moving to across all chains. So in the future, in the next 5 years, when you deploy, it's going to be like deploying on Android and iOS. You're not loyal to just one platform. You're going to go multiple platforms, and each platform provides something for you. So I think in terms of what we offer to developers, the flexibility and interoperability, because everything you do on Ethereum, you can do on our platform one-to-one. We support Solidity and EVM in addition to Plutus and so forth. And also just the markets we play in, and the fact that the entire industry is moving to multi-chain instead of a single chain, that bodes very, very well for us. You know, the other thing is that we're including a lot of infrastructure specifically to meet the regulatory needs that people have. Like, for example, Treasury Department last Friday declared that all wallets are eventually going to have identities connected to them.
Yeah.
And that also applies for DeFi. So how do you solve that problem? Well, guess what? We have a solution. It's called Atala Prism. We've been working on it for over a year. We've been building it with government partners, like the government of Georgia and so forth. And so it's very easy for us in that time horizon to include full FTTF support for the travel rule and authenticated accounts and these things. So as a developer, you say, okay, what stack is going to be fastest, cheapest, give me access to customers. I've never had customers before in like Africa, and I don't have to pay anything for them. They're just natively in that platform. And also it's going to solve all of my regulatory problems and so forth. And we compete there. You know, is it going to be an absolute domination? No, but there's no one religion. There's no one language. There's no one country. Humans are creatures of diversity, and it's perfectly fine to have a collection of winners and losers inside the setup. But we built Cardano last, and we built to be here for a long time. As a final point, governance is enormous. And these systems are like bacteria colonies. They get to a certain size and they start poisoning themselves. So Bitcoin is exhibiting this. So
absolutely.
Bitcoin can't
100%.
change. It can't. They keep trying to evolve. They know they need smart contracts. They know they need so much, but they can't upgrade the system. Every little upgrade is super expensive and time consuming. So you need governance on chain to be able to do hard forks and soft forks and to be able to sort out the who pays and who decides problem. Ethereum doesn't have that. Vitalik is against it. He's avoided it. And I think they're going to become victims of their own success. Like Bitcoin, they'll get too large and then they can't evolve anymore. Meanwhile, we have the capacity to evolve on chain, and there's always going to be funding to do that evolution. And the consortium of people who work on the core product will continue to grow, probably exponentially as we grow. So I think we have better growth model. I think we have better markets. I think we have better USPs. And, you know, the market will ultimately decide, but don't be lulled into first mover. That's what the first movers tell you to convince you that they're going to have monopolies forever, as Microsoft did, as Yahoo did, as the 50 other companies during the 90s and 2000s who look at BlackBerry and Palm. How the hell do we compete with them? They have such a smartphone advantage. Nokia has such a cell phone advantage. How do we compete with them? I mean, this is what Steve Ballmer was talking about.
I love Snake. It was a great game.
When it came out, when the iPhone came out, he's like, oh God, the iPhone was going to be a flop. How will they compete with these entrenched interests that have monopolies?
So crazy.
I know. So it's like technology and history tells us it's a very, very different story. I mean, look at Tesla and internal combustion engines and oil companies. And now everybody's building battery powered cars. By 2030, there's probably going to be more battery powered cars sold than internal combustion engines. So it's all about the model and the growth rate, and it's all about the economics and these types of things. And we think we're far more competitive in that respect than these other guys. And we'll see what they do.
Well, I like the confidence. And I think going back to our supplement analogy, I mean, what you basically just said here is Ethereum is random pre-workout and Cardano is the Viagra of cryptocurrency. Okay. Maybe that was a bad joke.
A whole new meaning to stiff competition.
That's good. All right. Well, Charles, we're going to conclude this part of this interview. We will have the next part out in a couple of days for my audience and things like that. So part 2, we're going to get more into actually what Cardano, like all the developments going on, the phase that it's in right now with Goguen and things like that. So we'll get more into that. Charles, thank you for joining us. We'll see everybody else in part 2. That's all I got. Be blessed. BitBoy out.
Cheers.